In the diet and nutrition world, there is one huge myth. This myth is everywhere. It is the myth that insulin and glucose spikes are the cause of insulin resistance, high blood glucose levels, inflammation, many poor health symptoms, and obesity. This is a myth that came about and was developed because at the time there wasn't enough science for people to really understand what was going on. Diet gurus took the information that was available and kind of made a guess as to what was causing insulin resistance, obesity, high glucose levels, etc. However, over the last 20 years, a whole lot of science has accumulated since, and this new science is revealing what is actually going on. What is the actual cause of insulin resistance, high glucose levels, obesity, and poor health? Now we actually have good science which tells us the root cause of all these health problems. It's time to discard these old ideas which are based on guesswork and realize there is no science behind them. It's very important that we understand the true root cause mechanisms behind our poor health symptoms and obesity, because accurate science guides accurate strategies. We don't want to be basing our food choices on guesswork and things which are simply not true. Inaccurate science leads to ineffective strategies, and none of us want that. The old story that we have heard for so long, this idea that too many insulin spikes make the insulin receptors tired, so they eventually shut down, making you insulin resistant, has become so ingrained in our consciousness that it is quite hard to move on from. It's like being brought up with a religion that you start to question as you get older. So let's have a look at the science now. First, just the observational evidence disproves the insulin spike theory. There are lots of people who develop insulin resistance on diets which barely spike glucose or insulin at all. And there are lots of people who have reversed insulin resistance and high glucose levels on diets that spike insulin and glucose galore. There is a clear disconnect between whether a diet spikes insulin and glucose and whether you develop insulin resistance or not. Wait, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that low carbohydrate diets don't help many people reverse insulin resistance. But what I am saying is that low carbohydrate diets, when they do work, don't achieve the reversal in insulin resistance because they prevent insulin spikes. Low carbohydrate diets, when they do work to reverse insulin resistance, achieve this by a completely different mechanism, nothing to do with reducing insulin spikes. So what is the actual root cause of insulin resistance and high glucose levels? It is leaky gut. Leaky gut is the root cause of insulin resistance and a whole multitude of inflammatory poor health. The science has been telling us this for nearly 20 years now, but many of the self-professed experts have been looking away. Now let's have a closer look at the science. A series of elegant studies first revealed the real root cause mechanism of insulin resistance way back in 2007. Scientists were analyzing diet-induced obesity in rodents when they discovered that rodents fed the fattening, unhealthy diet developed high levels of a bacterial toxin in the blood. It doubled within weeks, way before significant weight gain occurred. And they noted that this correlated with the onset of insulin resistance, high insulin and glucose levels, and liver and kidney inflammation. They then carried out further tests to establish if the bacterial toxins in the blood were in fact causing the insulin resistance and other symptoms of poor metabolic health in the rodents fed the unhealthy diet. So they infused tiny amounts of the bacterial toxin into normal mice that were not on the unhealthy diet. This was to isolate the effects of the toxin from anything else that could have been causing the insulin resistance in the unhealthy diet. What happened? The mice gained a little bit of weight, but not much. They developed strong insulin resistance, high insulin, high glucose, and inflammation in their fat and liver, just like the mice on the unhealthy diet. This shows that the bacterial toxin in the blood was able to induce insulin resistance and multiple symptoms of poor metabolic health, independent of insulin or glucose spikes. And the scientists didn't just discover that the bacterial toxin was able to induce insulin resistance and other poor metabolic health symptoms. They also showed that this was the only mechanism involved in the insulin resistance and poor health that developed as a result of the unhealthy diet. To show this, they blocked the receptor for the bacterial toxin, thereby blocking the bacterial toxin from inducing inflammation. When they blocked this pathway in the mice eating the unhealthy diet, the development of insulin resistance and poor metabolic health symptoms was completely prevented. In the absence of this bacterial toxin inflammation pathway, insulin resistance did not develop at all. The insulin and glucose spikes of the unhealthy diet were completely irrelevant. They did absolutely nothing to induce insulin resistance. There is only one mechanism by which the unhealthy diet induced insulin resistance and poor health. It is this bacterial toxin inflammation pathway. The insulin and glucose spikes of the unhealthy diet had nothing to do with it. But what is this bacterial toxin? Where did it come from? Why does it induce inflammation? And how does that induce insulin resistance? The bacterial toxin comes from the gut, because that is where the trillions of bacteria in our body live. The bacterial toxin is the fragments of bacterial cell walls, called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS for short. These bacterial fragments should be contained inside the gut, but the unhealthy diet somehow causes the gut to become leaky, which results in these LPS toxins leaking out of the gut and into the bloodstream. When they escape out of the gut into the bloodstream, the immune system sees it as something foreign, an invader, and it launches a low-grade chronic inflammatory response. Inflammation is the body's response to what it considers may be dangerous to the body. It is the body's defense system designed to get rid of something or to heal something. Think of cuts to the skin. The body creates inflammation to try and heal the cut. But with a toxin like the flu or a cold virus, the inflammatory response is only temporary. The inflammatory response kills the flu virus, and then the inflammatory symptoms go away. However, when the thing causing the inflammation is your diet, the inflammation never goes away, and the effects of that inflammation accumulate, making the damage even worse. And this accumulating daily inflammatory damage is the reason for so many of the chronic poor health symptoms that we suffer from, including insulin resistance. Besides insulin resistance, here are some of the other symptoms which are the result of this daily chronic inflammation in the body. Brain fog, poor concentration, anxiety, depression, headaches, migraines, achy joints and muscles, fibromyalgia-like symptoms, frequent colds, infections, autoimmune flare-up, allergies, eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, acne, rashes, itchy skin, fatty liver, and so on. So you can see that preventing this leaky gut-induced inflammation is so key to reversing so many of our health problems. It all starts in the gut, and that's what we need to target if we want to reverse these health problems. Forget your fear of insulin spikes and glucose spikes. They are irrelevant. It is the leaky gut-induced inflammation which is causing all of your symptoms, and this is what you need to focus on. This is what you need to correct if you want to start reversing those health symptoms. Scientists have named this inflammatory state of LPS leakage from the gut into the bloodstream metabolic endotoxemia. Endo means internal, and toxemia means toxins in the blood. It refers to the cell walls which should be kept inside the gut, leaking out of the gut into the bloodstream, where they are perceived as toxic by the immune system, resulting in the inflammatory response. But the next question is, how does this inflammation cause insulin resistance and chronic high glucose levels? Well, the inflammation disrupts insulin signaling so that cells stop responding properly to insulin. In the liver, insulin signaling acts like it stops the liver from producing too much glucose. When insulin signaling stops working, there is no brake on the liver's glucose production. You start to suffer from high blood glucose levels in between meals, in the fasted state, and after meals. The glucose spikes that occur are far higher than they should be. Now, back to the scientists and more discoveries about all this. The scientists then wanted to test if there were strategies which might be able to prevent the LPS toxins from leaking out of the gut on the unhealthy diet, and if that would also prevent the development of insulin resistance and associated poor health symptoms. So, in a follow-up study published in the journal Gut in 2008, they again fed mice the unhealthy fattening diet. But this time, they also fed them prebiotics, which are special fibers that feed beneficial gut bacteria, which are known to help prevent gut leakiness. What happened? The prebiotic-fed mice showed higher levels of a good bacteria called Akkermansia mucinophilia, which are known to strengthen the gut lining. And the gut barrier did tighten significantly. Levels of the bacterial toxin in the blood dropped back to normal, inflammation markers fell, and, as predicted, insulin sensitivity improved dramatically, even while the mice stayed on the unhealthy fattening diet. Again, blocking that leaky gut inflammation pathway, this time with prebiotics, completely prevented the unhealthy diet from inducing insulin resistance, high glucose levels, and poor health symptoms. The insulin and glucose spikes of the unhealthy diet had zero effect to induce insulin resistance as long as the leaky gut inflammation pathway was prevented, i.e., the insulin and glucose spikes of the unhealthy diet have nothing to do with the development of insulin resistance and poor associated health symptoms. So now you can see that this old story that diet gurus have been telling us for years, this idea that too many glucose and insulin spikes are the cause of your insulin resistance, you can see that this story is just that, a story. A guess that happens to be wrong. Insulin resistance is not caused by too many glucose and insulin spikes. These studies and other studies show us that it is leaky gut-induced inflammation that causes all of these health symptoms. That old idea that glucose and insulin spikes are causing any of it needs to be filed away in the debunked myth section of the library. So, now that we have identified exactly what is the root cause of our insulin resistance and inflammatory health symptoms, we now know exactly what we have to fix to reverse our insulin resistance and associated poor health symptoms. We have to stop the bacterial LPS toxins from leaking out of our gut into the bloodstream. The important question then is, the researchers in the studies that we have just looked at tested one strategy, eating prebiotic fiber. Prebiotic fibers feed the good bacteria which help to strengthen the gut lining, which helps to prevent gut leakiness. In an upcoming video, I will explore which types and amounts of fiber are most effective to prevent gut leakiness. However, not everyone can tolerate high amounts of fiber. Many people suffer gas and bloating from eating high fiber diets. Also, for many people who have developed an extremely overgrown gut microbiome, fiber may not be enough by itself to solve the leaky gut problem. So, are there other strategies we can use to prevent the leaky gut and associated poor health symptoms? It was the unhealthy diet which induced the leaky gut in the first place. What was this unhealthy diet which induces leaky gut, thereby necessitating the need for lots of fiber to compensate and patch up the damage? So, instead of, or as well as eating lots of fiber to prevent the gut leakiness, we can also avoid eating an unhealthy diet which induces leaky gut in the first place. So what are the features of the unhealthy diet which induced leaky gut in these studies? I will explore what are the relevant features of the unhealthy diet which are responsible for causing the leaky gut and inflammation. What is the dietary pattern that we need to avoid, the dietary pattern which is responsible for inducing leaky gut in the first place? This analysis leads to the idea of strategic food combining, avoiding certain food combinations, such as combining high fat with high carbohydrate. And the other major benefit of eating a diet which avoids promoting leaky gut in the first place is that this way of eating also helps to reverse obesity. This is because the underlying gut conditions which cause gut leakiness are also the same conditions which cause obesity, just via a different pathway. If you just focus on patching up the leaky gut with more fibre, this may have a very positive effect on all your inflammatory health symptoms, i.e. symptoms which are the result of things leaking out of the gut. But it doesn't tackle what is going wrong inside the gut, which is the cause of obesity. In upcoming videos, I will be looking in depth at all the strategies we can use to fix the gut in various ways, to both prevent leaky gut-induced inflammatory health symptoms, like insulin resistance, and obesity. Please do subscribe so that you don't miss any of it. Thank you for listening, and hopefully see you in the next one.